This is called the happiest days of all. My first term at Bingham Academy passed quite quickly, and December came before we knew it. Carolee and I excitedly packed all our things, barely able to wait for school to be over when Daddy would drive up to Addis Ababa to get us. Finally, one bright, sunny, dry season day in early December, classes ended and the school driveway began filling up with cars. Kids were dashing here and there, shouting with excitement. Parents stood around laughing and visiting, happy to be able to see old friends again. Carolee and I stood impatiently on the front porch looking for Daddy's Land Rover to come up from the gate to the main building. Finally, we saw it and bounced up and down as he drove to where we were standing. Daddy got out of the car and we raced over to him. He bent over, giving us big hugs as we squealed with delight. Handing him our suitcases, we both squeezed into the front seat, bickering over who was allowed to sit there first. In just a few minutes, we set off down the road, leaning out the windows, hollering and waving goodbye to our friends. Daddy laughed and began asking us questions. We never stopped talking for miles and miles. I kept leaning over the back of his seat to put my arms around his neck and kiss his cheek, hardly believing that we were actually with him. I hoped that I could make these moments last forever. After driving through Addis, we headed south down a long, paved but potholed road through the dry and dusty RC desert with its sparse forests of acacia trees on either side. Huge anthills rose in unusual shapes among the trees, some of them taller than Daddy. Small and slender ladies, dressed in long skirts with many strings of tiny beads around their necks and their hair pulled tightly into numerous little braids, herded lean and bony cattle down the road. Otherwise, there was little sign of life. Late in the afternoon, we pulled into a large mission station, Shashamane, which had a hospital and leprosarium. Driving down the center dirt road, bordered with trees, we admired this oasis of green in the midst of the desert. We drove past the typical mission houses on either side of the road until we found the one where we would stay the night. Carolee and I didn't stay up too long, being tired and having a big day of travel ahead of us, so we were quickly shown to our camp cot, where we would both sleep, our heads at either end and our feet in the middle. Of all things, Carolee was very fussy about not letting our feet touch. I was nervous that the narrow cot might tip over in the middle of the night, throwing both of us onto the floor, but we ended up sleeping soundly all night. The next morning after breakfast, we said goodbye and stopped in Shashamane town for gas. Daddy rechecked his jerry tins on the front of the car to make sure they were filled with gas and that the lids were screwed tightly shut. Then we left off onto the worst possible road. The big Italian trucks had left deep ruts in the road by driving through when it was muddy. Now that it was December and the dry season, at least the roads were not muddy, but the ruts and the potholes were dreadful. We lurched along slowly, in and out of deep holes, dodging others. Our car carefully wound its way up and down one steep hill after another. There was always a river to cross, and at the bottom, Daddy would have to decide if he could fix the bridge or if the car had to ford the river. Our hair was caked and stiff with dust, and our clothes were gritty. Our bones ached from so many hours of being jostled back and forth. But I absolutely loved these drives when we were together as a family. It was such a delight to see the countryside, the animals, and the birds. I waved to people who were walking or riding their mules along the road. I loved catching glimpses of bougainvillea or poinsettia bushes, and sometimes my favorite scent of jasmine flowers drifted through the window. I daydreamed, enjoying the scenery and thinking how exciting my life was compared to when I lived in Canada. After a few hours, we finally reached Hosanna town. We drove through quickly and started down the hill to our station. My throat tightened with anticipation as we neared the station. The best part of my life was about to happen, being home. Finally, we drove up through a long row of trees. As we came into the mission compound and our yard, Mom rushed out of the house with our baby sister in her arms. Leaping out of the car, we didn't know whether to hug Mom or Sherilyn first, and all became tangled in a mass of hugs and kisses. We spent a happy afternoon visiting. At bedtime, Mom and Daddy tucked us into our bunk beds, kissed us goodnight, and blew out the lamps. We drifted off to sleep, to the sound of soft classical music playing on our battery-powered record player. Our blissful Christmas holidays had begun.